It began the way all small-town tragedies do, quietly, in whispers that never reached beyond the county line. But for those who lived here, the truth was a shadow that never lifted. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tomb of Secrets. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon before this story pulls you in too deep, because this is the kind of tale that will follow you long after you've turned off the light. Imagine you're walking along a dirt road on a summer evening in 1912. The air is thick with the smell of dust and something else, something faintly metallic, like blood carried on the wind. You pass a field where no one has worked in years. In the distance, you see a house, not abandoned, not quite alive either. Its windows are shuttered from the inside, yet you swear you see movement. Someone standing there, watching. The family who lived there was unlike any other. Their surname was older than the town itself, carved into the first church pews and etched on yellowing deeds. The bloodline was pure, they said, too pure. And purity, in this place, meant never letting outsiders in. The twins, Jonah and Elsie, were the last in that line. Born minutes apart, they grew up in a house where the family tree had long since stopped branching. Their eyes were the same pale gray, their voices so alike that even their own mother would sometimes pause before answering. From the moment they could walk, they were told they were special, that they belonged to each other more than to anyone else in the world. At first, the bond between them seemed innocent, two children against the outside world. But as they grew older, the town began to notice things. How they walked hand in hand even as teenagers. How they would vanish into the woods for hours and return with clothes rumpled, cheeks flushed. The church ladies called it a phase. The men at the bar just muttered and spat into the dirt. When their part, Ents died within months of each other. Jonah and Elsie inherited not only the land, but the isolation that came with it. The house became their fortress, and whatever happened inside, no one dared ask. They were seen less and less, until one day, a midwife was called to the house, and what she saw when she stepped inside was something she never spoke of again, at least, not in daylight. The midwife's name was Clara Mays, a woman who had delivered half the town's children and buried the other half. She knew the difference between a healthy home and one rotting from the inside. The moment she crossed the threshold of Jonah and Elsie's house, she felt the air change, thicker, heavier, as though every breath was stolen from someone else's lungs. The curtains were drawn so tight no daylight could enter. The only illumination came from a single oil lamp, its flame trembling like it knew something she didn't. The walls were lined with portraits, generations of the same narrow faces staring back, eyes too close together, mouths set in identical thin lines. Clara realized with a shiver that she could not tell the difference between the living and the dead in those frames. Jonah met her at the foot of the stairs. He was tall, but there was a gauntness to him, as if the marrow had been drained from his bones. He spoke softly, almost kindly, but his eyes held the same unblinking watchfulness as the faces on the wall. Elsie lay upstairs in a room that smelled faintly of decay masked by lavender. Her belly was swollen, her skin pale and stretched thin as parchment. When she looked at Clara, it wasn't the look of a frightened mother-to-be. It was something colder, as though she knew exactly what she carried and exactly where it came from. The birth was not easy. The child came silent into the world, its skin slick and gray, its eyes opening far too soon. Clara's hands shook as she cut the cord. The baby didn't cry. It only stared, as if it had been here before. Jonah took it without a word, wrapping it in a blanket so worn it was nearly threadbare. When Clara left the house that night, she felt certain she would never set foot there again. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The silence of that child. The way Jonah and Elsie's hands had brushed it together when they passed it between them. And then, months later, she saw them again in town. Two figures with the same gray eyes, one taller, one shorter, both watching her from across the street. In that moment, Clara realized something that made her blood run cold. The child hadn't just survived, it had thrived. By the time the child, named Samuel, turned 6, the town had learned to avoid him. It wasn't anything he did outright. He never yelled, never pushed, never caused the kind of trouble other children did. But there was something in the way he lingered in doorways, watching people with a patience no child should have. He didn't laugh like the other children. In fact, some swore they'd never heard him laugh at all. Instead, he'd stand perfectly still while others played, as though he were studying them, memorizing their movements. And when the other children tried to include him, Samuel would mimic their actions just a beat too late, like a reflection trying to keep up with reality. Clara Mays still saw him now and then, always at Jonah's side. They'd walk together through the market in silence, their steps perfectly in sync, their heads tilting in the same unnatural way when someone spoke to them. It was impossible not to notice the resemblance, not just between father and son, but between them and the old portraits in that darkened house. Rumors began to spread. Some whispered that Samuel could hear thoughts. Others said he could predict the weather with eerie accuracy, or that animals avoided him entirely. The town's stray dogs would cross the street when he approached. Birds would scatter from the trees above his head. One particularly cold winter evening, a shopkeeper swore she saw Samuel standing outside her window for hours. When she finally worked up the courage to open the door and confront him, he simply smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that showed no warmth at all. She slammed the door shut and bolted it. The more he grew, the more people began to question the truth of Jonah and Elsie's marriage. Old records in the courthouse hinted at tangled branches in their family tree, names repeating again and again across generations, sometimes without explanation. It wasn't just the couple who had secrets, it was the entire bloodline. Clara kept her distance, but her thoughts often returned to the night she delivered Samuel. She could still see those newborn eyes, far too knowing, staring up at her in that shadowed room. And now, 6 years later, they hadn't changed. If anything, they'd only grown older. It was late one autumn when the first real cracks began to show. The leaves had long since turned brown, and the wind carried that sharp, brittle smell that meant winter was near. Jonah had stopped coming into town altogether. Only Samuel appeared now, sometimes at dusk, standing at the edge of the road as though waiting for someone who would never come. Clara heard the rumors before she saw the proof. A man from the next county over had been digging through public archives for a genealogy project. What he found didn't just raise questions, it chilled the marrow of anyone who heard it. The family's lineage was a closed loop, cousins marrying cousins, siblings adopting one another's children, names shifting in records to hide connections. There were entire branches where the father's name was replaced by a dash, yet the mother's surname matched the child's in unsettling ways. The oldest records were the worst. The grainy, faded photographs from the 1800s looked like different people at first glance. But then, when you studied them, you saw the truth. The same eyes, the same tilt of the head, even the same faint scar at the corner of the mouth, passed down like an heirloom. One photo in particular stuck in Clara's mind, a sepia image of 3 children standing outside a weather-beaten farmhouse. The 2 boys looked like mirror images of each other, though the record claimed they were born years apart. The girl between them wore a bonnet that shadowed most of her face, but her smile, if you could call it that, was far too wide for a child. The man from the archives believed this family line had been preserved deliberately. Every marriage, every birth, was carefully arranged to keep their blood untainted by outsiders. It wasn't a mistake. It was a design. When the news reached the townsfolk, something shifted. People no longer just avoided Samuel, they feared him. Parents kept their children indoors after dark, and even the bravest men in town avoided the path that led past that silent, decaying house on the hill. But Clara couldn't help herself. The more she learned, the more she needed to know, and with each new discovery, she felt an invisible thread tightening around her, pulling her closer to whatever secret Jonah had been hiding all along. The day Clara decided to go up to the house, the sky was the color of lead. The wind pushed against her like a warning, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rust or blood. She told herself it was just the season, the decay of leaves, but deep down she knew this was not the kind of rot you could rake away. The porch groaned under her weight, each step sounding like it might be the last before the wood gave out. The front door was unlocked. It always had been, as though Jonah had never feared strangers. Or perhaps he knew no stranger would dare to enter. Inside, the air was thick, stale, like a place sealed for decades. Sheets covered the furniture, but their shapes suggested something was wrong with what lay beneath. She pulled one away and immediately wished she hadn't. The chair beneath wasn't a chair at all. It was some strange contraption, a hybrid between a rocking chair and a restraint, its armrests notched with indentations the size of wrists. On the far wall hung photographs, dozens of them. Some were recent, but most were so old the edges had curled, and the faces within them seemed to blur as you looked at them. The children were the worst. Every one of them bore the same haunting features, no matter the decade. That faint, unnatural symmetry, the eyes too close set, the smiles too thin. Then Clara saw it, the door to the back room. It was newer than the rest of the house, its wood unweathered, the handle polished. She stepped closer, her heart hammering. A faint noise came from the other side, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled slowly across the floor. She reached for the handle. It was warm. Her breath caught when the door swung open, revealing a single bed in the center of the room. Lying on it was a body, sunken, gray, but unmistakably Jonah. Only he had been dead for years. The skin was dry, leathery, yet perfectly preserved, in a way that defied nature. At the foot of the bed sat Samuel. He turned his head slowly toward her, and in his gaze she saw something ancient, something passed down like a curse. His lips curled, not into a smile, but into the barest trace of recognition. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. Samuel didn't move from his place at the foot of the bed. His thin fingers drummed idly on the wood, the sound dull in the heavy air. Clara's instinct screamed for her to run, yet her body remained rooted, as though some invisible weight kept her in place. She forced herself to speak, her voice shaking. "Why is he like this?" Samuel's gaze flicked to Jonah's withered face. "He's not gone," he said quietly. "Not in the way you think." It was madness, yet there was a strange certainty in his tone, an assurance that made her feel as though she were the one who didn't understand the rules of the world. He explained it as though recounting a recipe passed through generations. In this family, death was not an end. It was a threshold. Those they lost were never buried. They were kept, preserved with old methods, rituals that smelled of herbs and iron and something far less natural. Their presence in the home kept the bloodline connected. She wanted to believe this was folklore, a delusion born from isolation and inbreeding. But then Jonah's lips moved, just slightly. A faint, dry breath escaped them, carrying a sound that might have been her name. Samuel's face remained still, his eyes fixed on hers. "We don't let them leave us," he murmured. "And we don't leave them. It's how it's always been." You think that's strange because you've forgotten. But in here, he tapped his temple, we remember. Clara felt her knees weaken. Her mind tried to reject it. This was a trick, the power of suggestion. But her gut knew better. The air in the room felt alive, humming with an energy that clung to her skin like cold oil. Samuel rose from the bed, slow and deliberate. Now you know the truth, he said. And once you know, you can't go back to the way things were. In that moment, Clara understood the true curse. It wasn't the keeping of the dead. It was the knowledge itself, a truth that sank into the bones and stayed there, forever. Clara didn't remember leaving the bedroom, yet somehow she was standing in the narrow hallway, her hand pressed to the wall to keep from swaying. The air felt heavier here, as if the walls themselves had absorbed every whispered secret and refused to let them escape. Behind her, Samuel's footsteps followed, unhurried, steady. You can go, he said softly, almost kindly. But you won't. Her mind screamed that she had to run, to get to the front door, to feel the night air on her face and the earth under her feet. But each step forward was a struggle, as though invisible hands were gripping her ankles, urging her to turn back. You've been touched by it now, Samuel continued. The knowing. It doesn't fade. It just waits, until you understand enough to stop fighting. She reached the bottom of the staircase, her fingers brushing against the cold brass of the doorknob. For one blissful second, she thought she could make it. Then she saw them. In the parlor, arranged like silent guests at a dinner party, sat 4 more figures. Their skin was drawn tight, their clothes old and brittle, their eyes closed in some eternal slumber. The smell of dust and rot was faint, but unmistakable. And yet there was a stillness about them that was almost regal. Clara's breath came in shallow bursts. She realized with a sickening certainty that these were not strangers. These were Samuel's parents, his grandparents. Perhaps further still, a bloodline displayed like trophies, as though death had simply been another chapter in their family story. Samuel stepped beside her, his voice low. Now you've met them all. Her vision blurred. A part of her wanted to scream, to tear herself from this place, but another part, a quieter, more dangerous part, felt an inexplicable pull. The faces of the preserved dead seemed to watch her even with their eyes closed. She tightened her grip on the doorknob. The metal was ice cold. All she had to do was turn it. And yet, she didn't